Jill reached the doors first, slamming into the heavy wood with one shoulder as she snatched at the handles. Amazingly, they crashed open. Brightness spilled out across the stone steps to the porch, lighting their path. She turned and started firing, providing cover as the 3 gasping men ran for the opening in the darkness. They piled into the mansion, Jill diving in last and Barry throwing his considerable bulk against the door, wedging it closed against the snarls of the creatures. He collapsed against it, face red and sweating, as Chris found the entry's steel deadbolt and slid it home. They'd made it. Outside, the dogs howled and scrabbled uselessly at the heavy doors. Wesker took a deep breath of the cool, quiet air that filled the well-lit room and exhaled sharply. As he had already known, the Spencer house wasn't abandoned, and now that they were here, all his careful planning was for nothing. Wesker silently cursed Brad Vickers again and wondered if they were any better off inside than out. Jill took in their new surroundings as she caught her breath, feeling like she was a character in a nightmare that had just taken a turn into grand fantasy. Wild, howling monsters, Joseph's sudden death, a terrifying run through the dark woods, and now this. Deserted, huh? It was a palace, pure and simple, what her father would have called a perfect score. The room they had escaped into was the epitome of lavish. It was huge, easily bigger than Jill's entire house, tiled in gray-flecked marble and dominated by a wide carpeted staircase that led to a second-floor balcony. Arched marble pillars lined the ornate hall, supporting the dark, heavy wood balustrade of the upper floor. Fluted wall sconces cast funnels of light across walls of cream, trimmed in oak and offset by the deep, burnt ochre of the carpeting. In short, it was magnificent. "What is this?" Barry muttered. No one answered. Jill took a deep breath and decided immediately that she didn't like it. There was a sense of wrongness to the vast room, an atmosphere of vague oppression. It felt haunted somehow, though by who or what she couldn't say. "Beats the hell out of getting eaten by mutant dogs, though, gotta give it that much." And on the trail of that thought, God, poor Joseph. There hadn't been time to mourn him, and there wasn't time now, but he would be missed. She walked towards the stairs, clutching her handgun, her footsteps muffled by the plush carpet that led from the front door. There was an antique typewriter on a small table to the right of the steps, a blank sheet of paper spooled into the works. A strange bit of decorum. The expansive hall was otherwise empty. She turned back toward the others, wondering what their take on all this was. Barry and Chris both looked uncertain, their faces flushed and sweaty as they surveyed the room. Wesker was crouched by the front door, examining one of the latches. He stood up, his dark shades still in place, seeming as detached as ever. "The wood around this lock is splintered. Somebody broke this door open before we got here." Chris looked hopeful. "Maybe the Bravos?" Wesker nodded. "That's what I'm thinking. Help should be on the way, assuming our friend, Mr. Vickers, bothers to call it in." His voice dripping sarcasm, and Jill felt her own anger kindling. Brad had screwed up big time, had almost cost them their lives. There was no excuse for what he'd done. Wesker continued, walking across the room toward one of the 2 doors on the west wall. He rattled the handle, but it didn't open. "It's not safe to go back out. Until the cavalry shows up, we might as well take a look around. It's obvious that somebody's been keeping this place up. The why and for how long." He trailed off, walking back toward the group. "How are we set for ammo?" Jill ejected the clip from her Beretta and counted. 3 rounds left, plus the 2 loaded magazines on her belt. 33 shots. Chris had 22 left, Wesker 17, and Barry had 2 rack speed loaders for his Colt, plus an extra handful of loose cartridges tucked into a hip pouch. 19 rounds in all. Jill thought about all they'd left back on the helicopter and felt another rush of anger toward Brad. Boxes of ammunition, flashlights, walkie-talkies, shotguns, not to mention medical supplies. That Beretta that Joseph had found out in the field, the pale, blood-spattered fingers still wrapped around it. A STARS team member dead or dying, and thanks to Brad, they didn't even have a Band-Aid to offer. Thump! A sound of something heavy sliding to the floor, somewhere close by. In unison, they turned toward the single door on the east wall. Jill was suddenly reminded of every horror movie she'd ever seen. A strange house, a strange noise. She shivered and decided that she was most definitely going to kick Brad's narrow ass when they got out of here. "Chris, check it out and report back ASAP," Wesker said. "We'll wait here in case the RPD comes knocking. You run into any trouble, fire your weapon and we'll find you." Chris nodded and started toward the door, his boots clacking loudly against the marble floor. Jill felt that sense of foreboding wash over her again. "Chris, His hand on the knob. He turned back, and she realized that there was nothing she could tell him that made any sense. Everything was happening so fast. There was so much wrong with the situation that she didn't know where to start. And he's a trained professional, and so are you. Start acting like it. Take care, she finally said. It wasn't what she wanted to say, but it'd have to be enough. Chris gave her a lopsided grin and raised his Beretta and stepped through the door. Jill heard the ticking of a clock, and then he was gone, closing the door behind him. Barry caught her gaze and smiled at her, a look that told her not to worry, but Jill couldn't shake the sudden certainty that Chris wouldn't be coming back. You've been listening to an excerpt from Resident Evil Umbrella Conspiracy, the first in a series of books written by S.D.Perry, based on the Resident Evil video game series. Thank you for listening.